Right. Wait, let me. There you go.
Yo, yo, what's up?
What's up, bro?
So I wanted to touch on the necessitarianism part. There's a lot of issues, but if you're talking about the theistic one, which are like the Abyssinians, it just makes the view very epistemically unlikely. Because so they do this thing called essentially and modally necessary. And they're like, there's a modal semantics of necessity, and there's like causal contingency, which they introduce that's not understood like by modal semantics. That's gonna make your ontology very bloated. Like you're not really fixing the issue when I say I'm as necessary as God. You're just adding stuff, which makes it as unlikely as it being like unsolvable. That's what I pointed out to the dumb Shias I was debating, Berger and Nassar and all of them.
Bro, I saw that. What was that? That one Indian guy. I saw that one. That was
Yeah,
funny.
that's brother. Wait, were you there? Have you
Yeah,
heard
yeah.
when he said, "Oh, God is not numerically identical to existence." He said, "Oh, that just means God is internally necessary." I was like, "Bro, that means by that standard, every theist believes in pure existence, which is just trivial. No theist will tell you God is internally contingent."
And I heard about the what he invented a new identity.
Yeah, yeah, I don't know. And then he said he's gonna go pray and never came back.
Yeah, yeah. I saw that. Yo, Vienna. I'm interested. I've never heard your. What is your response to the problem of evil?
Which one? Evidentialist, logical?
Logical.
Oh, well, I don't believe evil exists.
Like not at all.
No. Like, when I say exists, I don't believe it can be like evil simplicator. There is no such thing as uh like a metaphysical attitude towards evil.
Is it kind of like a
Yeah, it is
privation theory?
privation theory, yes.
Okay.
So there is no such thing that I can say of like, oh, evil was like caused by God and it was like is grounded by God and God is the explanation of evil. It wouldn't it wouldn't be that. Rather, evil would be something like something that is semantic, and those connotations are picked up from like social practices.
I suppose they might try and further reduce the question to just be, why does God allow for the privations of goods?
Why doesn't no? That's the evidentialist one. The logical one tries to say like, oh, the logical one says God. Let's assume God does not cause evil, but evil is there, and something doesn't come out of nothing. Therefore, evil came from God, and you can deduce a contradiction. Evidentialist
I thought
one,
you were responding to the evidentialist one.
no. The evidentialist one is going to say, well, God wants to test us. Could he have not tested? Well, it's conceivable that God could have tested us without, letting the bear kill a baby. Like, why did that happen? And the evidentialist one, there is this. Well, I wouldn't say I totally agree with the approach to skeptical theism, but it does fall under the same umbrella tree, which is that if you have an independent good reason for, uh, let's say, well, I'm a Muslim, you guys are Christians, so I'll limit it down to theism, okay? So let's say there's an independent good reason for the proposition, God exists. No, theism is true, sorry. A certain religion is true. And one of the claims that this worldview makes is God exists, God is good, and God is so on and so forth. And one of these claims is going to be there's no gratuitous evil. So if you have an independent good reason for this worldview, you can accommodate and raise the probability of the claim there are no gratuitous evils. So that's the approach I take.
Well,
That's
I
interesting.
suppose. I
Both of you
suppose.
said the same. Both of
Internal
y'all are talking.
perspective.
What was said?
So would you
What?
say, Thomas?
Oh, I was just saying, from an internal perspective of theism, you can deny gratuitous evils. Yeah. What do you think of people like I don't know if you know about people like Trent Doherty or their like responses to it, but like
No, I heard of them. I mean, they're fine. Look, with the responses like that, I treat them as sort of like gimmicky type of responses. Like, there are responses and they're laid out and so on. Obviously, I believe like it's philosophy. It's really speculative. It's you can shake things up a bit more. But what would be interesting is that which response is the most plausible?
well,
Yeah.
something I find interesting about his is he even tries to say that you can do the opposite and say that under theism, it's increasingly likely that a lot of evil would exist because then there's more chances for like good and greater virtues to be exemplified or for evil to be overcame, etc.
I know, which is fine, but these responses are fine. I'm not saying they're incoherent, but the one I gave is not. It's not going to introduce like a can of worms, and that's what I mean by plausibility. Because for that response, somebody might ask, well, presumably, we're talking about something like a certain case, like a bear killing a baby. Why did God permit that? It's conceivable that evil would be triumphed over and this goodness, like it's conceivable that like there's no semantics of good that is going to be removed if one baby is not killed by an animal. You know what I mean? Like that standard stays the same because it's such a like minimal occurrence. So it's gonna introduce like a big can of worms following that response.
Okay, yeah, I get what you're saying.
That's why
Yeah,
I believe my approach is the most plausible and the best way you can approach this. I debated many atheists on it too.
Vienna. I remember the other day someone asked you about Akara's um, response to the LPT, and his
Who?
response, or Kara,
Who's that?
Doomer.
Carter.
Oh, wait, is that Rumi?
Yeah, that's Rumi.
Why? What is this account? What are you doing?
Don't worry.
Okay. So what Kara's my buddy. I speak to him about philosophy sometimes just normal. I don't know that's the last time I spoke to him about the LPT, but we do share the same intuitions regarding things like relative identity and so on.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, but what is interesting, I was wondering what you think of his view. His response is kind of, he says, "Are you familiar with quietism?"
Oh yeah, that is his approach. I know quietism about yeah, I know it's like Mysterianism. I know.
Oh, but what do you think about it? Think
It's
it works?
fine. Look, see, that's the thing. Look, and in philosophy you have to discern between like a possible solution and like a plausible one. That's the thing what I just told Thomas. So when you say it works, does that mean it's like consistent with a set of metaphysical principles or like logical laws or whatever? Then sure, but there's also the things of like costs, how plausible this is. That's what I told, for instance, like G1 and everybody. I told them like, and I made this clear, and I even told other people, I don't like saying the Trinity is a logical contradiction. I try to refrain from that type of language because I don't believe relative identity Trinitarianism is contradictory, but I do believe it's incoherent. By incoherency, all I mean is going to lower the priors of the claim of it being true. That's all that it means.
So do you think quietism lowers the priors?
Not simplicator, but depends. It's really context dependent because you could be a quietist about something that is like overtly opaque.
Okay.
Like,
Yeah,
for
which
example, I'll give you an example, okay? Let's say, well, I don't believe this is the case, but I'm just giving an example for clarity's sake. Let's say I say the deterministic interpretation of quantum mechanics is false, and the indeterministic interpretation of quantum mechanics is also false. They're both very counterintuitive. And I'm a quietist towards my approach about quantum mechanics. I wouldn't say that lowers the priors of anything. It's more so that he's telling you why he's a quietist there.
Okay.
So there could be a case where like I would be like, yeah, this type of attitude I see where it's coming from, and in other cases I'd be like, yeah, that's like unintelligible to me. I don't know why that approach is taken.
Yeah, I don't know what the reasons would be with the Trinity for being a quietist.
If you see every hypothesis that explains the Trinity to have inherent issues, then yeah, quietism will be something preferable if you're a Christian.
Yeah. Yeah, Rumi, you still there, man?
Rumi, speak up. What's happening?
I'm just listening.
This is the first live I've been on for the past few days.
Yeah, same. TikTok's too toxic.
Yeah, I wanna. No, for me it was dry. I don't know what's happening.
No, it's too toxic. Or get like attacked by everyone. So
Oh,
take a break.
I don't know.
Trying to adopt some new positions.
What are you inquiring now?
I think I can still hold to ADS and the Quran being uncreated, but I can't. I think I can like distinguish. Do you know like the Ash'aris when they say like Kalam Nafsi, right? The Quran like and then they have like two views when it comes to the Kalam. They say like
How
God.
can you? When you say the Quran is uncreated, what does that mean?
There's a proposition within God's knowledge that says the Quran is uncreated.
Right?
So the Quran is uncreated in that
By
respect.
virtue of God's knowledge being uncaused.
Yes, and then.
But if that type of attitude is given, it's like that's the standard by which we say the Quran is uncreated. Then why can I not say deflationist is uncreated?
The why is uncreated?
Me.
Well, do you think like God has knowledge which is like created?
And God has knowledge of me, right? Presumably.
Yeah, but under your view, do you think God's knowledge is created in any respect?
No. I believe that's a category right to say that even. Because I believe to be created is to be not divine, not divinely sourced.
What do you mean by not divinely sourced?
Extrinsic to God.
And then how are you defining God here? Just the essence and the attributes?
Yeah.
Yeah, then I would say that to be God is to be identical to the divine essence, and then.
But that's fine. What is it called? But my point of contention was, what is it called? If the standard for, so let's say, oh, the Quran is uncreated, and I ask you, well, when it's unpacked, that means like there is a certain mental state of God that says like that is thought about, like there is a belief from God about the Quran, and that belief itself is uncaused. And but there is a certain belief from God about me and about everybody on this panel. But presumably you don't want to say they're uncreated. So I'm giving more of an internal
Well, I would say
assessment.
like the propositions about us exist. The propositions of God knowing us would be like uncreated, and then the propositions of us existing extrinsic to God would be created.
Yeah, I know, but that's the point. And what is it called? So, for example, Rumi being uncreated is as applicable as the Quran being uncreated. That's the route I'm going there.
Yeah, I don't see an issue. It seems like when the
Oh.
Salaf was speaking, well, when the Ijma the Salaf, when they're speaking about like anybody that says the Quran is like created is a kafir, it was referring to because they think if you say that, you're saying God's knowledge is like created and therefore like God is created. So it seems like if you go to like a tafsir or the soul of that the Ijma, you're referring
No,
to
I disagree with those hermeneutics, but my point wasn't about the hermeneutics of what's heresy there. My point about was like, if you do agree of like this consistency, I'm gonna point out, and you did agree, but that was my point that I was trying to add attention with.
Yeah, I think that's fine if you want to say like you're uncreated in the respect that there's a proposition within God's knowledge that says that you exist or you're going to exist or however you cash it out, and then you existing extrinsic to God is created, then yeah, I would say like in the same you are uncreated in the same respect the Quran is uncreated.
Yeah.
And I don't think
Well,
that-
as long as you, the point I was trying to bring up is consistency there.
yeah, I would remain consistent, and I think like holding to this then doesn't fall under takfir and be like consistent.
Have you gone through the stuff I told you to go through, like the views of properties and all of that, and epistemology?
I'm creating like a new theory to see if I can solve the issue.
What is it? But the properties and things of properties, they're not. It's like truth. Like the word truth. Truth is just an alethic predicate. It's just a logical convention which says one. Like in logic, there's 0 and there's 1. That's all truth is. Whether or not truth means it is pragmatic or it's correspondently true or coherent or by meaning, that comes later. That's the same thing with properties. Property in mathematical logic is just a unitary predicate. That's it. But whether or not properties are like concrete constituents or like abstract tests that do this and so on, that comes later in metaphysics. You understand what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So what theory are you thinking of?
Concrete essentialism.
And how is that different to like Aristotle's or Thomas?
So like
Thomas Aquinas?
essentialism is like the natures like abstract, right?
Hmm.
So if I just say the natures are concrete instead, and then it kind of like solves the issue, kind of. Like you're going to have these properties are going to be like concrete, and they're going to be like identical to the essence, which is once they're going to be like concrete, then like solves the issue there. Doesn't fall into like some performative contradiction where you're saying that God has no properties, and he also doesn't fall into the issue of the essence being abstract.
So everything has an essence, and that essence is concrete.
Yeah.
Everything has an essence, and an essence are concrete. And essences are supposed to mean?
Probably like what a thing is.
No, that's not robust. Like everybody agrees on that, but our essences, like the set of essential properties, are that's what they are. Now,
Possibly.
now are these essential properties? Are they what like when they constitute the essential identity? Is that like sort of causal relation? Is that just like something picked out linguistically? What is that?
The properties?
Yeah.
Well, the properties are going to be like one in reality. There's only going to be like one property in reality. There's going to be like virtual distinctions between them. So like yeah, this one property has like causal power and has causal efficacy.
So there are essences, and essence means like set of essential properties, and all of these are like causally efficacious. But you said for the case of God, there is one property.
Yeah, so God's essence has a set of essential properties, and it's only one property.
And it's only one.
Yes.
And God is identical to that, right?
Yes.
So would it be right to say God is apt to like what is it called? Concrete relations?
Well, what do you mean by concrete relations?
Because properties, when you treat them as concrete, they're going to be constituents. You know, they constitute something. They're about something. They're making up something. So when you have that in mind and you say, because we're trying to stay consistent, you know, it doesn't matter if it's 1 or 900 and million or whatever.
Yeah, that's
it's always going to be considered a constituent. So if God is identical to a constituent, then God is a constituent. But what is God constituting?
What do you mean by constituting? Like bringing something in?
I'll give an example. Would it be an error to say God is a part?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it doesn't make sense. What is he a part of?
Yes.
So that's the same approach I'm taking. If properties, when they're considered to be concrete constituents, they're going to be, and if God is identical to it, then it's true that God is a concrete constituent, but seemingly God doesn't constitute something. Unless if you believe in a constituent ontology where it says God constitutes the world, everything constitutes the world, and obviously you don't want to believe in that as a DDS proponent. But if you,
What would the issue be with that?
whether God is a part of the world,
No, if I just say like this constituent, I would just say that all it means is that God is like the explanation of the world, right? And then God causes the world.
no, that's not what constituent ontology means. Constituent ontology, that's like going away from, because properties, when they're concrete constituents, they're gonna be what is it called? They're gonna be constituting something. They're not gonna be merely just like sort of like reinterpreted to be like, oh, that's the explanation of this or so on. They're still gonna be constituents of something. That's the point. And assuming there are some theists who say God is they're personalists. Obviously, classical theists would stray away from these semantics, but there are theists who would say like, oh, God is mereologically fused into the world. Like the world is a whole big block, and God is a part of this block. There are theists who say that, but presumably you don't want to say that because you don't believe God is a constituent nor constituted. So that's the point of ambiguity I have there.
I would say that maybe you would like redefine properties or look into like how properties work then.
Because that's what properties are. If you say they're abstract, then a God cannot be identical to that. If you say they're concrete, they're going to be treated as constituents, and God cannot be identical to a constituent.
Yeah. What about just say like the predicates, like they're not identity.
No, properties are unitary predicates, but that's not giving anything metaphysical. Like that's the point I brought up earlier. Properties are unitary predicates, but that's not giving me any metaphysical account. That's a logical account. So so all things given, if anything, that's just like a linguistic device. God cannot be identical to that. So we're still trying to assess like what's being said there. Like what's the metaphysics behind it? Oh, when we talk about properties and like the actual world, we mean like bundle theory, for instance. Like everyone's a bundle of like these concrete properties that constitute them. Or we mean, for instance, abstract to, oh, I just mean like a linguistic device that picks out what is like correspondingly true about the subject. These are the metaphysical discourses. But what I'm saying, you cannot say God is identical to an abstracta, nor can you say he's identical to a concrete constituent. That could be exhausted dichotomously, by the way.
Would you say that under your view, you say the essence is a set of essential properties?
Yeah.
Would you say all of these essential properties are abstract, or would you say some of them are concrete?
No, I believe every property is abstract.
So God's essence is abstract.
Yeah, essence is a description.
Okay, and then God's act of creating, wouldn't that also be abstract?
No, because I believe it's not identical. Like the description is not identical to God. That's what I believe. A DDS proponent is going to affirm the identity statement.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter if they're identical or not.
I'll tell you why it does matter. Because since they're not identical, what I believe is that there is a referent God. Okay? Term God, referent God. And then we have a set of descriptions. And from these are going to be properties. Properties are just going to be linguistic devices. So when I say God has a property of omnipotence, that can be logically equivalent to the proposition that God is omnipotent is correspondently true. And correspondently true means it's real. real. There's ontology to it. It's real that God is omnipotent.
Yeah, yeah, that's fine, but how does God cause the universe in your view, right? Like he causes it through does he cause it through his essence, or like according to his attribute of like power, or how?
What? What? I don't understand. God just causes. He just metaphysically explains it.
Yeah, but what does it mean to cause? Like the DDS proponents is gonna say God causes things through his essence, and then
No, that's ambiguity to me.
okay, then when the Quran says that God created Adam with his yad, how do you understand that verse?
Or that the proposition God created Adam with hands is correspondingly true.
Yeah, so did Adam come from the hands of God under your view?
Yeah.
Okay, so the hands cause Adam to exist.
Yeah.
Then how can the hands be abstract if they cause Adam to exist? If you think like abstractors don't have like causal powers or cause they know it.
Just properties being abstract doesn't mean like what they pick out is abstract. For example, the omnipotence example, that just because the property of omnipotence is abstract doesn't mean what it picks out is abstract.
If that's true, then if God is like identical to these abstractors, and this only one abstractor is like cause or something like that, then why he's picking out is that God causes creation, that's why he's picking out, and then what follows is that like creation exists.
Well, I'm not following. What is being
Well,
said?
you're saying that just because like the property is abstract, it doesn't mean
Yeah,
that.
what they pick out is abstract. Yeah. What they pick out is necessarily abstract. Yes, because properties, under my view, they're just linguistic devices. When I say something is correspondingly true, my attitude is not the same as what is being picked out, and that's all it means for a property to be a property. It's just describing something. So you're just saying, oh, the God's omnipotence is correspondingly true. That's
Do
all
you
that
think
means.
do you think you can touch something that's abstract?
No, because I take touching to be denoting some sort of causal relation. And
Do you hold to the position that you can touch God?
I'm agnostic to it. So long as it's understood analogically, I'm agnostic to it.
Well, if you was going to commit that position, then you would have to say when you touch God, if that's his hand or another property, that property would have to be like it would have to be concrete, right?
What?
Well, so you say abstract properties are not causally efficacious or has like causal powers.
Every fact about God intrinsically and essentially is causally efficacious, if the fact is correspondingly true.
Yeah, so these properties are causally efficacious even though they're abstract.
They're not. No, that's not what's being said there. Properties pick out what's true of the subject. What's true of the subject is that everything inherent to it is causally efficacious. When that's being said, how is that a claim that includes anything about what's picking out what it's about? It doesn't include that.
Okay. I don't know, I don't really fully grasp it. You're saying that the things that are getting picked out are not well, you're saying that these properties are like abstract.
Okay, that which picks out the features of God is different from features of God itself. What is true
Okay,
of
I
God?
see.
That's all it is. Descriptions
Okay.
are not identical to the subject. That's all that is saying.
Okay, so you're saying that these things that are describing God's essence are going to be abstract, and then what it picks out is going to be concrete.
Yeah.
Okay. So like let's say we go back to like an example with a car, like the car door. What the car door picks out like the car what the car picks out like the car door is going to be abstract insofar as it describes the car, and then quasi efficacious as the overview, right? What it interacts with. Would you say that?
Car door isn't a property.
Well, it's something about the car, right? How you
Car's
use it.
redness is a property.
Yeah, of course. So how when you say car door, what are you picking out there? How are you going to define that?
Car door. That's all I'm picking
Yeah,
up.
but you're not going to say it's a part of a car, would you?
Why wouldn't it be a part?
Under your view of like part how you're defining it, seems like doesn't really meet the criteria.
I believe I don't have like a robust view of part, but I believe you can engage in calling things parts so long as they're like well I can approach this from many different ways. I don't have a robust view like I said, but I'll hold up one for discussion's sake. So for instance, the example of abstract objects, we don't want to say, assuming Platonism, the abstract objects have parts because parts are going to introduce some sort of causal notion. So we say they have properties, not parts. And this is when things, and the discernment between properties and parts there is going to be in something called ontological priority. And this is a distinction Kip Fine makes that says like, oh, something is formally constituted, and other things are ontologically constituted. No, some things are merely formally constituted, and other things are that and ontologically constituted. And to determine things like ontological constitution, it'll be some things like, oh, the car door and the car is going to be like there's going to be ontological priority. This is going to hinge on things like your positional cause or realism or whatever. But let's assume that for clarity's sake, the car door is causing the car, as in like, oh, there is what is it called? There are true causal statements between the car door in relation to the car, and it's a one-way relation. It's an asymmetric one. So that is why that can be considered a part.
Would you also say this about stuff like triangles and shapes?
They don't exist.
Would you say they're just like concepts in our mind?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but
Numbers, logic, geometry, all of them are conventions. Nothing mind independent about them at all.
but you still wouldn't say that, even though they're like concepts in the mind, you could still say there's like parts of it, couldn't you say? Like inseparable parts?
So that's the thing. If the hermeneutics of parhood is taken to be like constituent implicator, then you can speak of a lot of things having parts, in geometry and logic and a lot of things, even in logic, like, oh, this law is a part of the system. This is a part of that and everything. But if it's taken to be a constituent implicator, then a lot of things are going to follow that's going to be counterintuitive that conclude parthood.
Can you give an example that's like counterintuitive that would conclude parthood?
In an intentional context, even under ADS, but in an intentional context, God would be composed.
Because he's like part of existence.
No, because because mercy would not be identical to the term God's essence in an intentional context.
But what about somebody holds that there's only like a logical distinction, or there's actually no distinction at all?
Negative theology?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that's the only position that like doesn't circumference to like any part of it at all, because there's no constitution implicator. But because negative theology it denies all cataphatic predication, and to constitute something that is cataphatically predicating it. But negative theology is BS, so I don't care about it.
That's fine. And then because it seems that, especially like in your view, that when you say that God has like a hand, and that's not like the shin or something like that, and you're going to see God, then it seems that you're going to see different aspects of God, right? Which seems that there's going to be like some part of there. Like anytime I would close my eyes and imagine like something like an entity that exists that has these properties that you hold to. Seems like there's like at least parts here.
Why would it follow that just because you would like be sort of acquainted with this like visualization towards God, like cognitively, why would that follow if that's the case? Then God is like, what is it called? Caused or apt to causal relations.
Because if you close your eyes and you imagine an entity like X, and this entity X has a hand, he has a foot, he has like eyes, it moves, right? He has a shin, right? You're going to think these are parts, right? And you're going to think that whether these parts are, and you think this entity also causes things with his hands, then you're going to suspect that these hands do have like causal relations. And then you're going to expect that if you hold to like, let's say you hold to like how you view cause as in like a strong PSR, or even like a type of PSR, right? Maybe like a strong P. Let's say we stick with like the strong PSR, then the explanation is going to lead to these things causing one another, and then God being caused. But even if you don't want to grant that
No, it's I see what you mean. I'll address them. Look, for me, if your sight is restricted, and you can see a certain aspect, that doesn't mean it's like a conglomerate of like different facts that are like metaphysically explaining the term God. For example, God could make your sight restricted so that no matter what angle you look at, you see the same monad. So let me think. So you have mirrors, or like, I don't know, some telescopes or kaleidoscopes. These are gonna be, they're gonna have mirrors that like, you can see them, you can see yourself, you can see like a reflection and so on. Obviously, this is gonna be analogical language. By the way, I'm audible, right?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, obviously there's going to be analogical language, but you can see yourself in these mirrors and so on. But if you hit the mirror and like there are cracks, you see yourself but different aspects. You see what I mean?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So that's how I visionize it. I don't vision as in like I go further away and then there's this part of God I can see, and I get closer and I can't see the other one. No, I don't visualize it like that. I see it more as a cognitive limitation.
So you think you can see like the whole of God?
I believe you're always seeing the same monad.
So
No, that is false. I retract that. I believe I believe beyond, I believe you're only like, the monad is there, but you just see, what is it called? When seeing is considered, that has to do with cognitive limitation. How restricted it is or not restricted at all.
So like when you see God and you see He's like there's gonna be epistemic issues. Like you don't know what like there's many going to be like loads of issues, but when you see like the hand, even though you don't know what a hand looks like, so like how do you know what's a hand and what's a shin, right?
No, there's a hadith that says, well, this is going to be a theological point, which is there's a hadith that says Allah will appear in a image such that like you know that is Allah or that is divinely inspired by Allah. And somebody will appear in an image, you will not, you know that it's not Allah even though it claims to be.
Yeah, I'm not saying that like you don't know it's Allah, right? I'm saying you know it's God, but
No,
you
no, no,
don't
no.
know.
I know. I'm not saying that either. What my point is like from that hadith you can deduce that if there's a certain fact about God, for example, we never saw Allah, but Allah still says in those hadith, and like those hadith still assert that we can know what things are without even ever like having any like sort of relation to them, a direct relation to them. So I can apply the same type of reasoning here.
I don't think that's what the hadith means. I just think that, well, I don't think I don't accept that hadith, but I think what that hadith is just saying is that you're going to know what God is when you see God, right? You're going to know that's God. But
Okay, why can I say that about like what is called? Why can I say that about every attribute?
yeah, that's the issue with your view, right? That you're going to look and you're going to see the hand or the shin or something, and then I'm going to ask like, how do you know this is a hand or how do you know this is the shin, right? You're just going to say, well, we just know because
I believe we'd know because it would be fitri. It will be intuitive, and that is what's asserted in the hadith. I'm
and it's
granting if
not fitri though.
huh?
It's not fitri though. You only know these things because of revelation tells you, right?
No, when I say it's fitri, I don't mean it in the sense like I know these things off. No, that's not my point. When I say it's fitri, I'm saying the intelligibility is fitri.
Yeah, it's intelligible to know what like when you
If it's
okay, so
intelligible, then it's recognizable.
yeah, so you can recognize the hand and you can recognize the shin, but how do you know that's the hand and not that's the hand, right? How do you know X is the hand and not Y is the hand? Because you know one of them's the hand, but how do you know which one's the hand?
One of them is the hand, but which one is the hand? They're both the hand. I don't get it.
No, so like you're going to see the hand and you're going to see the shin, right? So you have X and Y. How do you know Y is the hand and not X is the hand?
How do you know Y is the hand and X is the hand?
No, how do you know Y is the hand, not the X? Or how do you know it's X, not Y?
I believe I'm gonna know it intuitively.
And that's based on just the hadith or...
Yeah, hadith and theological commitments.
Yeah, see, don't really see that as like a good like answer. You're just saying that you're just going to like know when it
How
seems
so?
like there's the epistemic issue here.
But the answer is not question begging, by the way, because I'm
Yeah,
appealing
I'm
to
not
it.
saying it's
In this
question
case,
making. I'm just
huh?
saying like not like the best response here. That you're saying
Why?
that.
Why would it not be? Obviously, it's not. It's not substantiating anything external, but I believe theological points are kept to theological discourses. So obviously, I'm always going to refer back to theological points when I'm answering these sort of like discourses.
Or you
I
could
I got the hadith just a moment. Allah comes to his faithful worshippers on the day of resurrection and appears to them in an image other than the image which they saw him previously as a test for them. He would say to them, I am your Lord. They will say, we take refuge with Allah from you. We will stay till our Lord comes to us. When our Lord comes, we will recognize him. Subsequently, Allah will... Yes, the same thing here. And well, my own scholars, how the hermeneutics from them are going to be fleshed out. They have this sort of approach of like, yeah, it's fitri, it's intuitive. You're in the afterlife, you're gonna know, you know? And because your fitra is gonna be so cleansed in the afterlife, if you make it a Jannah, so much so to the point like it's recognizable, it's intelligible. So that's what I'm basing it on.
So you're saying that from like a metaphysic point of view, you can't like explain, or an epistemic point
This is a metaphysical explanation.
of view. Did you? Yes, I'm
I
saying.
I cannot give an a priori reason, but I can give a metaphysical explanation.
So apart from theology, or apart from like this appeal to the fitra, right? There's no way to like distinguish the hands, but you're saying because you're gonna
No,
be
there is no a priori way, but there is multiple a posteriori ways.
yeah. So why don't you just change the theological position? That doesn't commit you to this issue.
Because the theological commitment is highly likely.
So because of like the Salafo teaching this.
Yeah.
Yeah, then why don't you
That
just that?
that no, because you have an independent good reason for that being highly likely. Whatever point that was brought up here internally is not going to triumph over the priors. The priors. Remember Thomas what he said about problem of evil? I told him about my response. That is the same line of reasoning, by the way. Is that the claims of my faith is that God would never permit gratuitous evils. I cannot prove that a priori. I would never give you a case such that like, oh, conceivability is there and like, yeah, I agree, it is conceivable and I don't see a defeater, but there is no way to do that. But you can say God does not permit gratuitous evils because God says he doesn't permit gratuitous evil. And that claim is highly likely because of an independent good reason. So let's say I give you an abductive case for a worldview, and one of these claims makes a claim such that it's going to be internally founded. Just because it's internally founded, that doesn't mean it's like lowered there.
Yeah, of course, but I'm saying that if you give like a case for this worldview, and then I can say, look, I'm just going to take your worldview, copy it, and then change this position, and I can like remove this issue, then my worldview is going to be more likely than your worldview.
And no, which issue exactly? What?
Like seeing God with your eyes, or God having like hands and feet and stuff like this.
Oh, then I believe that lowers the worldview.
Lowers it by denying these stuff?
Yes.
How?
Because I don't believe it's going to be consistent with the claims of the other priors. So think about it like this: if the Quran is true, P, then the Prophet's words are true, Q. If the Prophet's words are true, Q, then the Salaf's hermeneutics are true, R. If the Salaf's hermeneutics are true, R, then Salafi is true, C. If you deny one of these things, then you deny the entailments, which means you just collapse the whole thing.
Yeah, I would just say that there's some like assumptions here, such as that.
Obviously, it's assumptions, but I'm saying from my what I'm exhausting here, what I'm assuming is what is it called? There's no such thing that there's no such thing as like you pick this and then you remove it. Well, now
Yeah,
you
I
just
think I can copy that worldview and it still work under my worldview.
then how would you explain a lot of things like the Salaf's hermeneutics?
Yeah, I'll just I redefine the self differently.
But that's going against the convention, which lowers your priors.
But we can increase it through other means.
This is going to be prior dependent, not something like a posteriori. I mean, it's not something posterior to the claim. Sorry.
Yes, I would just say that we start at the
So, for
cross.
example, think about it like this. For example, let's say I believe, like somebody gives me a case against my theory about Jesus. I say Jesus claimed deflationist is going to exist, and I redefine the Bible, redefine early followers of Jesus. I redefine a lot of things. I give my own hermeneutics. They're going to be like, you're going against the convention, and I say, well, I can increase the probability by other means. Well, that's going to be an issue because what is it called? You made a big claim right there. You made an external claim. You said Jesus spoke of me. The claim I'm considering right now, the theological commitments, they're going to be internal claims. And I'll tell you why they're going to be internal. Because if that hadith was false, I would have thrown it away. But if Jesus never, if it's proven that Jesus never spoke to me, I'm a liar, and I don't want that to be the case. So some things are going to be priors, and others going to be posteriors. So you don't want to, what is it called? There's going to be some things like, oh, bro, I'm just going with it because it's internally founded. But if it's internally inconsistent, I'll throw it away. It's not like something foundational.
I would say that would you agree that all the propositions within our set, we want them to be true?
Sure.
Okay, would you say that the more reliable stuff is, the more likely it is to be true?
Yeah.
So if I just say that the more reliable a hadith is, the more likely it is to be true.
Okay.
Would you also agree that we shouldn't speak about God without certainty?
How is certainty fleshed out?
That we have like an overwhelming like justification, however you want to hold to, and that gives us this reason to believe this is like from God, right? Like the hadiths, if we can authenticate them, these are like the words of the Prophet, peace be upon him, right? Such as if we have like a Hassan hadith, then we have some certainty that this could be from the Prophet. But if we have like a mutawat hadith, we're going to have like more certainties from the Prophet.
Yeah, I believe there are degrees of certainty too.
Yeah, would you say that we're more certain when it comes to a mutawat hadith than a sahih hadith?
I believe if hadiths are mutawatir, then they're sahih.
Yeah, but I mean like a hadith can be sahih and not mutawatir.
All right, sure.
Yeah, so and we should only speak about God, right, with as much certainty as possible.
I don't know how certainty is fleshed out there.
Yeah, so I'm saying that if we have the
And what do you
Quran,
mean speak of God? We can speak of God in da'if hadiths.
yes, yeah, I would disagree with that. I say that if we speak about God in da'if hadiths, Hassan hadiths, or even Sahih hadiths, right?
Speaking about doesn't mean affirming. It just means
Yeah, but I mean affirming. Yeah.
affirmation. Affirmation is gonna be like rule dependent.
Do you think you can affirm stuff about God from da'if hadiths?
What do you mean by could? Like, is it
So let's
possible?
say there's a da'if hadith that says.
No, I get the concept, but by could, do you mean is it possible? Well, I believe, I don't know, maybe there is a da'if hadith that was classified da'if, but it's true. And it said something true about God. Maybe. But it's really implausible.
Okay, so do you
and
think
if somebody affirms something about God that is through da'if hadith, would that be like, I would obviously have this sort of attitude with them. Like, I'd be like, it's on shaky grounds.
Do you think we should speak about God and affirm stuff about God through da'if hadiths?
No.
Okay. Do you think so? If we shouldn't speak about God through da'if hadiths because they're generally weak, we should only speak about God through hadiths that are more reliable.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we have sahih hadiths and we have mutawat hadiths, then we should speak about God more generally through mutawat hadiths than sahih hadiths. Would you agree?
No, I believe that's a false exhaustion.
Can you explain how?
I believe certainty. I believe affirmation can be fine as soon as you reach sahih.
Yeah, but like if we use like consistency here, we say that if X is more reliable.
No, that's why I said it's false, because if you take consistency to be something like exhaustive, then you're gonna find yourself in a counterintuitive issue. Like, mutawatir has degrees too. There are mutawatir hadith that are more mutawatir than others, and others and others and others. And then when you reach the one that is as mutawatir as it could be, Why is that affirmed over every other mutawatir hadith? That's the point. So as to the sarayis and over and so on, like, oh, a 17-year-old is and not an adult, and an 18-year-old is an adult. Well, a millisecond before turning 18, were you an adult or not an adult? No, that's not how it works. It's just categorized like that.
Yeah, so I would say this doesn't like relate, because mutawatir, we're going to have like the set of hadiths that are mutawatir and the set of hadiths that are like sahih, and then the sahih ones are the hadiths that are in mutawatir that speak about God, right? Are not going to contradict each one of the other, but if you have the sahih ones that you speak about, then either you can derive there's a contradiction between the Quran and the sahih hadith, or you can show that within the sahih hadith they speak about God in like a counterintuitive way, but in these mutawatir hadiths they don't speak about God in like any anthropomorphic way at all. So
I was agreeing with everything you said until anthropomorphic.
yeah, so the like taking the
Because
approach.
I believe, well, anthropomorphic is a buzzword, but colloquially speaking, I believe the Quran is anthropomorphic.
Yeah, see, that's where we're going to disagree. I think if we start at the Quran and reason, we can reason that God doesn't have like hands or anything like that.
How so?
Because one, it goes against intuition. I think that your
That's not
definition.
going to negate the apparent authorial intent of the Quran, saying, look, if I told you, Rumi, you should use the best philosophy ever, and whatever goes against it is false. By the way, Rumi, I believe in idealism. What that translates to is that deflationist encourages, engaging in discourse, and let's assume idealism is false. Does that mean deflationist believes the idealism is false? No. What would it be said is that deflationist encourages a behavior, and even if the behavior would entail something counterintuitive for him, that doesn't change his beliefs. He would still believe idealism is true and encourage that behavior. So that's why I tell people, let's say like, oh, the Asharis, oh, you should use logic and logic and no, because on the appearance, somebody tells you, I created this with my hands, I istiwa and all of this, and use reason. The authorial intent of that is going to be seemingly prima facie is that he's encouraging behavior and he's telling you he has this. And that's why I don't like using this as points, but I'm just adding it for like the discourse related stuff. That's the same point Sean Anthony and like Saeed Reynolds and all of them make about the Quran.
That's fine. I could argue that your definitions are inconsistent, and that's like a point.
Which definition?
Let's use the hand. Do you take like what most people take, or do you define hand differently?
Definitions are not exhaustive.
So, what would you say for all x is a hand different only if what?
Exactly. Definitions are not exhaustive.
Yeah, so how do we know God has a hand, right? What does it mean for God to have a hand here?
God says he has a hand, and it's extrapolated upon what the hand is, does, and so on.
But what is
the context and intelligibility is occurred through there. Look, I'll walk you through some stuff. And I believe it's very stupid to say definitions are exhaustive. But what is it called? Definitions not being exhaustive doesn't entail unintelligibility, because, for instance, if I told you, Rumi, for any why is a chair if and only if what?
I don't think chair has a definition.
Okay, then you just affirm this position.
Yeah, but I don't think this applies to everything. I think that's like a...
Yeah, exactly. Dude, when people say definitions are not exhaustive, they're not making a universal claim. They're negating the universal claim essentialists make.
Okay, so why...
Yeah.
Why are we saying, like, just because it applies to chairs, that doesn't mean it applies to God as well? Like...
No, it's gonna... And I'll tell you where it applies for God. Okay, look. I believe mercy, love, and justice and things under that tree are gonna be uh are gonna be distinct, even though I cannot really emphasize on the distinction. Because if I say God broke down, I mean, God gave water to people that are thirsty, I cannot exhaust anything for love, and so much so that it cannot be swapped out for justice and wisdom and mercy.
I
You
think
get what I'm
depending
saying?
on the context, you
So
can.
they're umbrella terms of family trees. That's all they are. You know, they have common traits. But that doesn't mean they're the same. You know,
Well, why don't you just reduce the amount of entities that exist in the worldview and say they're identical?
what is identical?
Like mercy and love and these things that you can't really distinguish.
Why do I say no, I believe it's counterintuitive to call them identical. I believe it's an error. Like, from the colloquial usage of these definitions, a lot of people are gonna say, what is it called? Even though you cannot exhaust them properly, or maybe for one or two, but like not intensively, you're going to like struggle. What is it called? In exhausting them, but you wouldn't say they're the same, you know, because they would even have like a more niche usage of connotations that suffices for them to be differentiated.
But why not just say they're just distinct in reason or they're distinct in meaning? Like how like the scholastics either say there's like a conceptual distinction, a minor
No,
virtual
I believe
distinction.
all of these categorizations are stupid.
So you think there's no such thing as like a virtual distinction or anything?
No, when I say either the distinction is semantic, or either the distinction is like co-intentionality or not, or co-extensionality or not. I don't believe, and I believe that it's dichotomous, and anything, and what is it called? And anything beyond that would just be ambiguity and just like a confusion.
Yeah, so if you say like they're intentionally different but they relate to the same thing extensionally, then what's the issue?
Because it would not be stance independently true that God is loving.
How so?
Because if God, if the fact of God that God is loving is stance dependent, then stance independently is not true. Because that's what intentionality and sectional context are. They're talking about attitudes. Stance dependent, we can speak of God. We can speak of God having the fact of Him being loving, but stance independently we cannot. Under my view, if we assume my view, I believe stance independently God is loving.
What about reduce them to names and deny them as attributes?
What if God is named? If God has that name, presumably He would have that fact about Him. No, what?
Well, you said that these are names, but they just flow from the essence. They're not necessarily like an attribute, and you reduce like these entities that exist in your worldview.
No, I don't see how that follows. Why would what? No, because I don't know what it means to call something good, but it's not a stance independent fact that it's good. Like why would Satan not be good at that point?
Because we can use like natural law to derive that Satan's not good. Like we're not good how to like divine command theory. That's like that has issues.
Yeah, why is Satan not good?
Because he contradicts natural law, contradicts rationality.
But I just give him the name.
You gave
Am
Satan.
I justified in giving him the name the good?
No, because we can know from reason that Satan's not good.
And natural law is gonna tell us that in Satan lacks a fact about him that he's good. That's the same point here. I don't know what it means to call somebody to give somebody an honorific title, but it's not true that he has this property of the honorific title. That's like insanely like horrible.
No,
To me.
so we're just saying that like when we say God is good, we just say that like there's something that flows from God, which is goodness. It's not like some really distinct property that
Okay,
introduces.
that falls into the same thing. Is it like, is the proposition God is good correspondently true?
If you mean as a property, then no.
Let me rephrase it like this. Is it a true fact? Is the fact about God that he's what is it called? Uh, so let's consider two properties, okay?
Yeah.
It stands independently true that God is powerful, and it stands independently true that God is good, right?
Yes.
Stands independently. Are these two facts identical?
Under my worldview, under your worldview.
Yours.
Yeah, they'd be identical.
So how can they be differentiated if they're identical?
They're differentiated in like a ratio.
But I said stands independently. That's stands dependent.
Oh no, I thought we was on about your view. In my worldview, there won't be stance independent. Like
Yeah, okay, exactly. Yeah. So it's not a, that's my point, is that it's not a stance independent fact that God is good. It's going to be stance dependent. I believe it stands independently true that God is good, and it stands independently true that God is powerful. And for me to maintain these to be factive in the first place and not destroy them by collapsing into each other, I have to say they're not identical. So that's where it's derived from.
couldn't you just hold to like some formal distinction?
I believe there's ambiguity there, but I believe the stance independent and stance dependent is dichotomous. So you cannot really put like a middle ground and escape from there from a dichotomous point of view.
So you say
Because
like
I can rephrase it. It's either dependent on a stance or not.
yeah, so there's like a middle ground, just like how the Scotus or the Lawless, right? They say that
What is the
formal
middle ground in a true dichotomy?
No, so like you're going to present that like there's this dichotomy, just like how the Thomist is going to present there's this dichotomy that either exists independently of the mind or exists dependently on the mind, right? If exists independently of the mind, it's a real distinction, and if it exists dependently on the mind, like it's a virtual distinction. But if I say like it exists independently of the mind in one respect and exists dependent of the mind in like another respect, then there's going to be like a middle ground here.
No, not really, because I'm saying there's a certain fact. Fact
Yeah,
of the
so
matter.
the fact
Hold on,
in
hold
one
on.
respect.
Let me finish. There's a certain fact that it stands independently true or not.
I'll just say that there can be a middle ground and deny the false dichotomy.
How is it a false dichotomy? It's exhaustive. It's logically exhaustive.
Yeah, but if I just say there's it stands independently true in one respect and stands dependently true in another respect.
No, because that doesn't make sense, because it's either stance independent implicator or not. If it has attitudes of stances there, then it's going to be stance dependent, but it's still going to be interpreted extensionally. That's the whole point. So when you say my PS5 has stance dependent properties and stance independent properties, I'll give you some. My PS5, it looks beautiful to me. To me, my PS5 is the color white, stance independent.
Yeah.
When you say white, where is there? Can you say there's a one respect to stance dependent and not? To me, that just means it's just presented in an intentional and extensional context, which is still the same dichotomy. Like I can speak of my PS5 in stance dependent ways and stance independent ways, sure, but that doesn't negate the dichotomy there about the PS5.
Yeah. I would say that with you, I don't know with the example of whiteness. I think I would have to think how you would phrase it in the middle.
There wouldn't be, and I believe violating this would violate the Eliyam, because it's either the case that is that's dependent on the stance or not. If it is not dependent on the stance, then it's not. Then it's stance dependent. If it is dependent on the stance, then it's stance dependent. If it is not dependent on the stance, what is it called? Then it's dependent on the stance. Then that's double negation right there. Denying double negation would mean that's an axiom of classical logic. Denying that would mean you're denying classical logic, which is a hefty cost.
Yeah, no one wants to deny classical logic.
So yeah, that's the point. That's my point when I say it can be dichotomous and was exhausted dichotomous. This is why, bro, when you make distinctions, it's better to talk about like attitudes or intentional, extensional context and so on. That's why in philosophy, when people talk about like, oh, I'm a moral realist and I'm a moral anti-realist. When Michael Humer and all modern day philosophers, when they talk like this, they never define moral realism about like some obscure, like in one nature or whatever. No, they always say there are stance independent moral facts. Then they get into the metaphysics of it. But that's the conventional usage first, because that is the best way of like examining these discourses. And that's why stuff like distinction and reason and formal and reality, minor real is neglected. It's just too obscure. It's not exhaustive enough.
But wasn't you saying earlier with like the definition of hand, it doesn't need to be exhaustive enough?
No, definitions not being exhaustive is different from dichotomies being exhaustive.
Okay, I see.
For
yeah,
example, definitions being exhaustive just means we can come about to know all these different words without exhausting them. But that doesn't mean it's a false dichotomy when I say you either love the person or not. You understand?
Yeah, of course. So something does need to be exhaustive but can still be intelligible, right?
Yeah, pretending definitions, yes.
Yeah, so what's the intelligibility of a hand?
Hand, simplicator?
Yeah. Well, a hand when we speak about God.
No, whatever it says on the text.
Yeah, it just says hand, right? But
No, it says more than that. Creating with the hand, grabbing, folding, so on and so forth.
Yeah, but multiple things can grab and fold and not be a hand.
Yeah, but it's not called a hand. It's commonly is accommodated with the term hand. So why would we assume it's that rather than a hand?
Because like if you say like there's this hand and this hand can grab and fold and everything, and I can show you something else that can grab and fold and everything, then you're not really like distinguishing the hand.
No, I'm not denying that. I'm not denying that. What I'm saying is that I accommodated with the hand because it was called a hand and it was invoked in this sense. Why would it be another thing other than a hand?
Well, no, I'm not saying that it's not a hand. I'm just saying that you fall into like an issue of not being able to distinguish in it about like between other stuff like a foot. Like if I say like a foot can grab stuff and it can hold stuff and it can fold stuff, right? Then you can't like distinguish a hand from a foot. And you fall into
you
like
can.
Okay, go ahead.
They were used in different contexts, and prima facie, I'm justified in saying this.
So you only justify because the text says it.
Yeah.
Yes, it does. That's like you don't start with reason. You start with like revelation.
What? No. What? How was that? How was what I said an issue? Because saying there are facts about God that are only a posteriori known, how is that an issue?
Because it seems that you're going to be like inconsistent, or you're just going to say, well, the only reason this like is the case is because God says it, right? But this is assuming like many things. So it seems that God's words can be like exhaustive, right? When then like I think we should grant that. It also seems that you're always taking the apparent when you don't know if God could mean something else.
No, that is skepticism. That's not dealing with. That's not inconsistency.
That's not inconsistency.
Your mic is terrible, Lewis. Yo. For example, I'll give you an example. Trinitarians, well, the mainstream Trinitarian view is that, what is it called? The Trinity is only known off a revelation. That wouldn't like lower the priors of Trinitarianism. All that it means is that if Christianity is true, then the Trinity is true. That's all that it means. And this is going to be based on like certain semantic conditions, this conditional. And if those are satisfied, then obviously the consequent is true. That's the same approach here.
Yeah, but like when a Christian goes to the text and they see stuff like hand, the foot, or the
No,
back of
that
the
has to do with hermeneutic. I know, obviously, but we're talking about revelation simplicator.
yeah,
Like
but why
the same thing can be said there too. Like no, that's like a derail, because we're not talking about, for example, the hermeneutics. We're talking about if the conditional is viable. So the same thing could be said. It was like, oh, Trinitarian, it doesn't really say the Trinity. What if it means that? What if it meant that? What if there's a quadrinity? What if Unitarians are correct? What if Arians are correct? But that's not the point of interest. The point of interest is if the conditional is viable or not. Can you derive necessary truth from a posteriori means? You can. A water and H2O is a necessary, water identical to H2O is a necessary truth derived empirically.
Yes. But if we can cite as that when we go to the text, there's something we have two sets when we go to the text. We either can derive that God has a hand or God does not have a hand, right? And we can say that there's this text that says God has a hand, but either we take the apparent interpretation, but hold to like some ambiguous definition of a hand, but just say that it's a hand because of the context, or we can say we can reinterpret the meaning of hand to mean something like power, for example. And
No, I believe on face value it doesn't. It is a hand.
yeah, but why are we taking the face value?
Because the face value is the most likely interpretation. What? If I say, Rumi, I want a bottle of water, on face value, that's gonna be me wanting a bottle of water.
Yeah, but you're taking one verse instead of interpreting the text holistically.
I believe the hermeneutics of the text is the face value is the most likely.
So when it says face value that God is unlike creation, what do you think that means?
God is not univocally like creation.
Okay, why just in that respect, not in every respect?
Because I believe in every respect. I believe the hermeneutics of every respect is unfounded within colloquial usages.
Yeah, so why like take this univocally and say God is unlike creation, and the apparent is that God does not have anything that resembles creation. So he doesn't have a hand at all because that resembles creation. He doesn't have a foot.
No, I agree. Yeah. God doesn't have a hand insofar as it's understood univocally. Yes.
Yeah, but why keep he as a hand then? Why not say it's power?
It's analogical.
Yeah, no, I know it's analogical predication. But why not interpret it as power, and then it's less likely to be thought of or have a phantasm of it to be like creation?
No, I don't believe that's the case. What?
Okay, so if I just say like there's these two entities, and entity X has like has power, and he has love, and he has glory, right? And then I said there's this entity Y, and Y has a hand, he has a foot, and he has a shin, right? Which one is more unlike creation?
I don't believe the question. I don't understand what's the question asked there. I
Well,
believe
I'm asking which
I
one
believe
is
all
more
the
likely.
words there are like analogical or can be univocal to creation.
Yeah, so if I say that both of them are analogical, which one's less like creation?
Neither. I don't know. I believe the question doesn't strike me enough for that.
Okay, so let's introduce more. Entity X also does not move, right? Entity Y, it moves, right?
Oh,
It
then
moves.
obviously the former, yes.
Okay, so according to what you've admitted, the Diash review is better than the Diath review.
But why would that jump follow?
Because Entity X I just described is like an Ashray view of God, while Entity Y that I described is your view of God.
Uh,
Do you see
recognizing
how
a
you're...
view to be more apophatic doesn't mean you're more true to the verse.
Well, I just showed based on your own intuition that you appeal more to the Ashray view of God because it's intuitive that it's unlike creation more than your view of God, and we
No,
want to hold to the apparent of that
no.
verse.
You could recognize something as to be more apophatic and still be true to the verse. I'll give you an example. Does that mean people who believe in negative theology are more consistent with the verse? No, I don't believe you're more consistent than me, because the general principle was that you don't speak of God, vocally. That's all that it meant. I stayed true to that principle as much as you did. The only difference between me and you is that you took a more apophatic approach. That doesn't mean you stay true to the verse more than me. Now you understand?
Yeah, so how do we know what constitutes more to the verse between? But let's say we hold to like
I don't
analyze.
believe there is a degree that either you stay true to the verse or not.
Okay, so do you think both of them stay true to the verse, the Ashari and the Afri view?
Yeah, I believe every Muslim tradition, even the heretical ones, the negative theology, they all stay true to the verse as much as each other, but they differ on how radical the apophatic approach is.
Do you think the level of radical apophatic can constitute like either being inconsistent with the text or straying away from that verse as more than the others?
No, why would that be the case?
Well, if something is like radically apophatic, then it's less likely to be like coherent with scripture than one that is not as radically apophatic, right? Like an Ismaili view of the text is going to be way it's going to be as much as parsimonious than like an Afro view of the text or an Ashari view of the text, right?
No, what? Parsimony has nothing to do with this.
Of course, because you're going to introduce all of these new like explanations to why the text has to be like this way instead of taking maybe like the parent, like you said. Like what's like a more simpler or better
I
explanation?
believe that is the face value of there's nothing like him.
That is not univocal.
Yeah, I can justify this by many ways. I believe that's the most likely interpretation because that, first of all, number one, the hermeneutics of early Muslims. Number two, what is it called? The Quran itself uses analogical language. Number three, what is it called? You have this sort of notion of like, when it comes to interpretations, it's like it still stays true on face value. I'm not adding on a general principle. I read the book and I took on what's from the face value.
But what about the author intends something more than the face value? How do you know?
What'd you say?
What about the author intends something more than the face value?
What if the author intends something more than the author would make it clear?
Yeah, so when the Quran says that everything will decease, right, except from the face of God, right? You don't take that by the apparent. You don't think
I
like
do.
So you think God's hands are going to like disappear?
No, that's not what it's meant. What?
Yeah, so you're not taking it by the apparent then?
It is the apparent.
Okay, so how do you distinguish whose apparent it is? Because according to me, according to my apparent, that means that everything disappears except from
Okay,
face
okay,
of
I
man.
see what you're saying. Oh, I misunderstood your question. Oh, what if somebody takes it hyper literalistically and just says, "Well, I'm reading it literally, dude. Like, face is not hand." Oh, yeah, but again, that's gonna boil down to what is it called? There's two other things, the two other merits I mentioned: hermeneutics of early Muslims and the Quran's language and context itself. So you can deduce it from the context. If I told you something like, "Rumi, me and you are gonna win the war, and I promise nobody's gonna be alive except us," does that mean the soldiers are? I'm wishing for the soldiers to all die? No, I mean like me and you, the generals of this war, we're gonna triumph over the other ones. That's the context it's set in.
Yeah.
So I gave you principles there.
Well, I think early Muslims. I think that's gonna be
That's
hard
the
to
major
perceive.
point of contention, right? I believe early Muslims were literalistic.
But I disagree.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. But my point is this: I'm employing my hermeneutics internally. I'm not making. I'm not saying, well, that's why you should believe in it. My point is, I'm telling you how I'm internally inconsistent with it. And
Yeah.
and
So do
there's
you
no
think
and there's asymmetry. There's asymmetry between me and all the other hermeneutics.
Okay, how do you justify? Well, so apart from early Muslims, because there's going to be a disagreement who constitutes an early Muslim and not. How do you know what are the correct set of principles to apply when go to the text and the justification for it?
Well, it's just general principles of authorial intent. Anyways, bro, I have like a headache, bro. I want to go. So,
That's fine.
is this your main account from now on?
No, I'm just I got like burnt out from like reading so much today. But I didn't want to activate my other account because I get attacked like every single day. So
No, but Rumi, the real question is, can Allah hear colors?
no, I'm not.
It's trolling Yoki with stuff. I don't know. Maybe I'll come back later. I don't know. I'm tired for now. I've been on this for like an hour or two. I want to relax a little.
That's fine, of course.
All right, take care, man.
Take care.
Take care, bro.
Take care. By the way, Rumi, that hadith you brought up about what was the hadith? It was I haven't got it memorized, but it's like talking about the end of the world, where the only thing that will remain is
Oh, that's
Allah's
a
face.
Quran verse.
Oh, is that a Quranic verse?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure there's a hadith about it as well, though. Anyway, yeah. And so yeah, I've heard that being brought up to Salafis before. So you want to take the apparent meaning, but then
Yeah, but they're going to say, based on context, it doesn't mean that.
okay.